you all for your wonderful cooperation, and I hope today we will get the same kind of cooperation from all of you. So today, as scheduled, we have two sessions. One session, the first session will be by Professor T. Marks, that is plenary session number 3. We will begin it shortly. The topic is hammering the national center and postmodernism in the politics of difference. Resource person, Professor T. Marks, who has already joined us in this meeting room. And then the second session, plenary session, will be at 3:15. The resource person is Dr. P. Jayapriya, and the topic is retracing fairy tales, a feminist approach. And after that, we have in the evening valedictory session by Honorable Registrar of our university, Professor R. Sunandamma, at 5:30 p.m. So this is a brief schedule of today's programs. In between, we have two paper presentation sessions, which will run parallelly on Zoom as well as on WhatsApp, as we did it yesterday. So with this brief summary of today's program, I would like to begin with the first session of today's. Professor T. Marks has joined us already, and I'm extremely happy to give a brief introduction of Professor T. Marks to all of you. Professor T. Marks is a bilingual scholar. He is a scholar of both Tamil and English. He is a professor. He is presently working as Professor of English in Pondicherry University, Puducherry. He completed his MA and PhD from Manonmaniam Sundarnar University. He has specialized in the fields of drama, comparative literature, subaltern studies, and translation studies. He has successfully guided 4 students for PhD program, and at present 5 students are pursuing PhD under his guidance. 15 students have been guided by him for their MPhil program, and he has published 15 books in English and 2 books in Tamil, which prove that he is a scholar in both these languages. He has also presented several papers in national and international seminars and conferences. He has successfully organized 4 national and 2 international seminars. He has a profound experience of teaching for the last 18 years and research guidance experience of 9 years. Professor T. Marks has been a member of several academic bodies and committees. With this brief introduction of today's resource person, I welcome Professor T. Marks for this session. I welcome you, sir, and will be glad to listen to you, sir. Over to Professor T. Marks. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for the nice words. Professor P. Kannan, Chairman, Postgraduate Department of English and Research Center, Karnataka State Akka Mahadevi Women's University. Mr. Deepak H. Shinde and Mr. Akshay Yadi, Assistant Professors of the Department. Dear learned colleagues, research scholars, and student friends, good afternoon to you all. I'm indeed delighted and feel honored to be a part of this national webinar on contemporary literature and literary theories in English. Well, thank you so much, dear Professor Kannan, for having invited me to deliver a lecture on this wonderful virtual platform. Honestly, I should tell you an interesting twist that happened so very accidentally in my topic. Actually, I have given the topic as hammering the notional center, colon, postmodernism and the politics of difference. But then the organizers, by an oversight, have printed it as national center. Anyhow, my topic of discussion
We are
today,
sorry for the mistake, sir.
anyhow, anyhow, my topic of discussion today is not about the national center, but only the notional center. But in the course of my lecture, if you are reminded of the national center again, I am not responsible for that. Well, in this lecture titled Hammering the Notional Center, Postmodernism and the Politics of Difference, I'm trying to trace the crisis in the politics of identity and the emergence of the politics of difference, thereby trying to discuss the success or rather the relevance of postmodern politics. Before we try to understand the postmodern politics, let us regurgitate the modern politics as we are all familiar with. I strongly believe that modern politics can be identified as a specific socio-historical point in time when the belief that religion and politics are inseparable has collapsed. In other words, the umbilical cord that connects religion and politics got severed, and the birth of politics sans religion is the point where exactly modern politics has actually made its mark. So one can cite the French Revolution 1789 as a very good example for secular politics, politics without religion, politics sans religion. The three words that made up the motto of the French Revolution, liberty, equality, and fraternity, came to the surface for the first time in the world history. And key terms and concepts like democracy, welfare state, parliament, proletariat revolution, proletariat dictatorship, national liberation, fascism, fundamentalism, democratic protests, radical protests, terrorism, non-violence, and other terms related to modern politics became cliched terms with passage of time. The French Revolution 1789, the Communist Manifesto 1848, the Paris Commune 1871, Russian Revolution 1917, and the liberation of colonies one after another 1945 to 1950, and even after that, and subsequent People's Revolution in China are certain important milestones to understand modern politics. We always keep certain terms and concepts like democracy and fascism, nationalism and proletariat dictatorship, which are contradictory to one another or opposing to each other, but in the same bracket called modern politics. But certain factors that unite or bind these contradictory concepts together are threefold. Number one, secular politics. Number two, fundamentalism. And number three, the politics of identity. The political argument encountering reality, social reality, or other social problems with regard to modern politics, be it capitalism, Marxism, nationalism, or fascism, is totally dependent on a foundation or a base. Throughout history, one can see the capitalist politics having the liberal market policies and practices as its foundation, whereas the communist movement having Marxism as its base and the fascist elements having a racial supremacy and concepts of purity and pollution in the Indian context as their basis. Hence, The political arguments related to each and every problem is constructed upon these foundations very systematically. In the political arguments, there is a deterministic relationship between the foundations and the objects of argument. This is my first topical point with regard to my discussion today. In the political arguments, there is a deterministic relationship between the foundations and the objects of argument. That is, ultimately, in each and every problem, the foundation or the base is the one which determines the political argument. The nationalist politics believed that the emergence of the nation states will solve all human crises. The capitalists believed that only the liberal market economy is the solution for all human crises. And fascism believed that miscegenation, intermixture of racial groups, is the sole reason for all human crises. Marxism says that economy is the base for all kinds of social and political inequalities. Likewise, in all problems, in all times, there is a base which is potential enough to be examined and analyzed. And when everyone believes that it is the base which determines all the political arguments and objects of knowledge, one should notice that the quality of totality is imposed upon such a concept, such an idea. When this kind of a narrative, an ordinary narrative, a day-to-day narrative, is given a transcendental and eternal status, this narrative tends to become or is transformed into a meta-narrative. That is the sad part of the whole discourse. So when an ordinary narrative is given a transcendental and eternal status, such a narrative becomes a meta-narrative. For example, when T.S. Eliot was calling for humanity as one, he wants humanity to be one. His humanity, Eliotian humanity, is the European Christian humanity. With the disintegration of European states, with the European nation states, T.S. Eliot was crying for the reunification, like in one of his plays titled The Family Reunion. Carried away by the force title Family Reunion as if it was a family get-together. It was not a family get-together, it was all the European nation states coming together to promote the European Christian humanity. Similar way, our own Ramayana, our own Mahabharata, which were made national epics to promote Indian nationalism, which is synonymous with Hindu nationalism. So, Bankim Chandra Chatterjee's Anand Math, a novel which was set, which was set on the Sannyasi rebellion in the late 1700s, which had nothing to do with the Mughal conquest, but the whole text Anand Math by Bankim Chandra was trying to, when all these sannyasis were trying to cry, right, we are ready, we are all ready, we are all prepared to fight our enemies. The enemy was identified as an enemy within. I mean, the Muslims, the other, but not the actual colonizer, the British imperial agents. So the text which which was floated in the Indian socio-cultural space with an agenda to promote nationalism. And many such works followed the work, primarily Rabindranath Tagore's Gora, R.K. Narayan's Waiting for Mahatma, Raja Rao's Kantapura, Prem Chand's Godon, and many other works. And there is a serious construction of Gandhi as the icon of Indian independence in Indian literature. Umpteen number of works, especially in the post-independence period and slightly in the pre-independence period, a lot of works, literary and non-literary works, were designed, were constructed, with an intent to promote the icon called Gandhi as the savior of Indian national movement. but you won't find any works, not a single work modeled after or to promote the image of Muhammad Ali Jinnah, the counter political figure, or Dr. Ambedkar, a serious political leader on par with Gandhi, and even Subhash Chandra Bose. So there is a historical bias in the projection of Indian nationalism. Even in the case of the promotion of Bharatiyar and Bharatidasan, the two Tamil nationalist poets, there is a bias in the formation of the content related to Bharati and Bharatidasan in the textbooks. When though Bharati and Bharatidasan, both of them belong to the nationalist movement. Both of them sang songs of nationalist pride. Both of them were patriotic in their fervor. The amount of importance that was attributed upon Bharati was not there in the case of Bharatidasan, partly because Bharati was promoting Indian nationalism, whereas Bharatidasan was an agnostic who was promoting Dravidian nationalism side by side. So the primary and the inherent defect of fundamentalism is that it is dangerous potential to its dangerous potential to view its political target and political strategy as single dimensional and monolithic. This is my second important topical point. So the primary and the inherent defect of fundamental system, fundamentalism, whatever it is, nationalism, Marxism, capitalism, fascism, whatever it is, any form of fundamentalism, its dangerous potential to view its political target and political strategy as single dimensional and monolithic. We all know how the Jews became political target for fascism and how capitalism became a target for Marxism. Modern politics has very trickily constructed the masses, people who were included in these meta narratives as political communities with a single identity. This is the point which I'm trying to problematize. This group of people that are referred to as these political communities in these meta narratives were considered to be having a single identity that cannot be changed forever. We are familiar with certain identities based on class, ethnicity, and language, but there are certain fundamental biological identities like gender, race, etc. Within a single identity, the construction of single identity, the differences within the single identities were also completely disregarded or bulldozed. For example, when a woman has the gender identity, just because she is measured by parts of her body, the fundamentalist modern politics considered a woman as a gender identified person, and hence the differences between women based on caste, class, context are completely ignored and neglected. Similarly, we know how the linguistic ethnic differences were bulldozed when it comes to the construction of nationalism as a discourse. Nationalists believe that these internal differences might destroy the unity of the nationalist discourse, the totalitarian nationalist discourse. Like this, the limits and boundaries of these identities are permanent and rigidly drawn, rigidly demarcated, and hence these identities cannot be influenced by external factors and hence considered closed categories within quotes. At this juncture, I would like to emphasize the point that identity politics clearly defied and rejected the existence of the very presence of the other. This is my third important topical point in my discussion today. The identity politics clearly defied, rejected the existence of the very presence of the other and the ethical justification of the other. It also deprived the right of the bracketed political community to shift into the other even temporarily. So they are not supposed to be the other even momentarily. This kind of shifting from one identity to the other is completely rejected by the identity politics. In India, one can shift very easily from one religion to another religion. but not from one caste to another caste. This has been the point of fixing the borders permanently, the non-flexible nature of this identity politics, the very idea of identity politics as a fixed entity has been strengthened and backed by the philosophy of the Enlightenment age. All of us know that in the later half of the 20th century, post-structuralism and postmodern thoughts critiqued the Enlightenment project. And let us now see how Derrida's deconstruction has exposed the violence that got entangled and embedded in what we understand as modern politics. It becomes essential that the signifier and the signified should be yoked together like bulls to the cart to establish an identity, or to put it in simple terms, for the very formation of an identity, there should be a close link between the signifier and the signified. Structuralism per se initiated or tried to establish, initially it tried to establish the fact that the relationship between the signifier and the signified is very much natural, evolutionary, and inherent. Post-structuralism questioned this. More specifically, Derrida and Lacan exposed the illusion of immediacy. The relationship between the signifier and the signified is not single-dimensional. It's not even it's even necessary to differentiate the referent from the signified. So the object which we refer to as, this is an example for students who are new to this, to Saussure, Foucault, and Fanon, and the post-structural philosophers and postmodernists. The object which we refer to as cut, C-U-T, has two different meanings in two different contexts. In English, it simply means to cut, means to sever, to divide, to separate, to sever an object into two. But when you use the same cut, the sound cut, the phoneme cut in the Tamil context, it means it's not something to cut it into pieces, but to unite, to tie it together. So kattu means to tie in the Tamil context. Hence, this signified is not a closed category. I give you another example. There is a lot of ambiguity in the title of John Keats's La Belle Dame sans Merci. Merci in French means thanks. So when people say merci, madame, thank you. But this La Belle Dame sans Merci, here mercy is not something that represents thanks, but it has something to do with grace, something to do with gratitude, something to do with pity, sympathy, qualities of goodwill. So the La Belle Dame sans Merci conveys a different meaning from the intended meaning that we usually take in French. So the signified, this is an example for all kinds of words. For example, when I say, I have to rush to the bar now, if I am a sports person, people will interpret that specific bar, a monosyllabic word, B-A-R. I should rush to the bar. If I am a sports person, people will interpret it quite easily that I am going to play the single bar, double bar, and other things. If I am an advocate, people will immediately think of the advocate's bar, the chamber. If it is an ordinary lay person who is rushing to drink something in a bar, in a liquor shop, it can also be interpreted. But then, without the context, without knowing the speaker, the identity of the speaker, the context in which the sentence is uttered, one cannot get what is signified with the word bar. So this is the case with a monosyllabic word like bar. Just imagine all other words. So the signified gets its meaning only in the context. In different contexts, it derives different meanings. Hence, the signified we encounter is not giving a single meaning. post-structuralism created and put forth a concept called floating signifier in order to prove that the relationship between the signifier and the signified is not stable, it is arbitrary. This affects and makes us feel that one specific signifier can have more than two, three signified objects, or can have relationship with more than one signified or referent. With the possibility of having more than one signified object, the importance of this specific relationship between the signifier and the signified is considered dependent. When the relationship between the signifier and the signified becomes dependent, then identity formation is also dependent. When the stable and unchanging relationship between the signifier and signified is impossible, it also means that the absolute identity is highly impossible. So it is not just the meaning that changes according to the context. We cannot even grasp or completely understand the context itself. We can't just fix the limits of the context because the context is sprawling like an open space, like an ocean. Hence, the closed categorization or the closed identity is highly impossible, over which nation states are very particular in establishing closed identity and trying to establish hegemony over very, very ordinary masses of people. So the society and the context have become an open space where the language games are played, or language itself plays its games. Discourses are playing against each other and embodying over and upon each other. So I would rather say the society is not a scientific laboratory. When we analyze or examine two different factors that are affecting each other, it is impossible to keep all other factors stable and unchanging as we do in a scientific laboratory. As in tradition and individual talent, Eliot argues that the mind of the poet is the shred of platinum. I hope all of you would have come across the famous critical essay Tradition and Individual Talent by T.S. Eliot, where he compares the poet's mind with a chemical chamber where sulfur dioxide and oxygen mix in a chamber containing filiated platinum to produce sulfurous acid. In the whole process, the filiated platinum never gets affected, but without its presence, the product won't come fruitful. This is how the poet is referred to as the man who suffers and the mind which creates. The more perfectly will the mind digest and transmute the passions which are its material, but the mind is not getting affected in the process. This filament of platinum, right, is the poet's mind. This combination takes place only if the platinum is present. Nevertheless, the newly formed acid contains no trace of platinum at all, and the platinum itself is apparently unaffected. It has remained inert, neutral, and unchanged. I'm borrowing these three terms of T.S. Eliot to explain my point forward. It has remained inert, neutral, and unchanged. So, in a social space, at a time, over a specific act or an incident or an event, all kinds of factors will certainly have impact. So all kinds of relationships which we analyze in a social sphere are dependent only. Hence, a subject which identifies itself as a Tamilian. For example, when I say I'm a Tamil, I can identify myself at the same time as a man, a father, an officer, or a servant, an agricultural farmer, or a manual scavenger, or a landlord, any number of identities that are embedded over and above every identity. So the closed single identity which you are trying to construct is always intimidated, shaken, disturbed by the exterior. the external factors over which you cannot have any control at all. For example, one specific word, lunch. If I ask an Indian or a Tamilian perhaps or a South Indian perhaps, had your lunch, which I'm having a banana leaf over which a lot of rice, sambar, rasam, curd, pickle, and a lot of other curries, papad. It's a conglomeration of a lot of things. Whereas when I ask the same question to a European, that question has no, it is something a piece of a loaf of bread and jam, or perhaps semi cooked, half cooked vegetables, or a salad, fresh vegetable salad. So the Indian lunch is not perhaps European lunch. Your lunch is not a repetition of my lunch, or my lunch is not an imitation of your lunch. Hence, qualities, essentiality, and repeatability of identity lose its validity. One thing I wish to stress upon here, postmodernism never negates identity, because when I repeatedly talk about the failure of identity, or the essentiality and repeatability of identity losing its validity, you shouldn't mistake that postmodernism is all against identity. Postmodernism never negates identity. The primary job of postmodernism is to shift its focus from being totalitarian and essentialist to becoming multidimensional and pluralistic. I try to briefly sum up the crux of this argument in a sentence. A text, a literary text, a printed material, or an online source, a text grows as the context grows. A text grows as the reader grows. So when I read a nursery rhyme in my kindergarten days, it gave me a different kind of flair and meaning and interest to sing the song, like a parrot, imitating the text. But when I, as a grown-up adult, when I read the same nursery rhyme, I try to find out a lot of hidden meanings, a lot of patriarchal elements, a lot of biases, a lot of cultural elements deeply embedded in such a small nursery rhyme. So when this is the case with a nursery rhyme, just imagine certain classical texts and canonical texts. So the most important critique that Derrida put forward regarding the Western philosophical tradition was the primacy of presence. He deconstructed the idea of structuring the conflict that is between speech and writing, speech versus writing, giving the privilege of presence to speech than writing, and broke and making it sound natural. I think we need not get into the details of this literary deconstruction. Now, let us try to understand how deconstruction helps understand another dimension of violence that is imbibed in modern politics. Let us start from the point where Saussure and Derrida broke the system. The relationship between the signifier and the signified is not neutral, it's not natural, it is structured. It is something that was instituted, and this remained the main contribution of Saussure. But the same Saussure, who unquestioningly accepted the Western concept of giving importance to presence, declared that speech is more natural than writing. That is because while speaking, in a speech, the person who speaks is in front of us. But in writing, that is not the case. By saying so, Saussure accepts the natural quality of speech. A little while ago, it was the same Saussure who said that there is no scope for direct relationship in languages. Saussure, who said that language was instituted only by means of binaries, opposites, differences. When he says that, the same Saussure says language is something natural, then we can understand that what is happening in Saussure is not confusion, but rather an expression of violence. Language, ethnicity, creed, caste, gender, genetics are all just institutionalized. But when these concepts, hiding the fact that they have been institutionalized and structures, i.e., when it structures an identity for itself and tries to usurp the power, the center, the notional center, then it becomes violence. To put it succinctly, when anything that is institutionalized tries to project itself as natural, what erupts is violence. So it is when the national hegemony comes down so heavily on innocent citizens, saying that singing Vande Mataram is as natural as patriotism, as your blood, or as yeast to bread, or saluting the national flag is as natural, or following the customs of the land is very natural, or eating beef is something which is not natural, which is very much anti-national. So this kind of when something that is institutionalized, when it is trying to project itself as natural, the violence erupts there. So at this point, it is important for us to remember specific aspect. Is it Derrida's intention to prove that writing is more important and primary than speech? Certainly not. The aim of breaking the structure is not this. The post-structural politics and its intention is to pinpoint certain inherent contradictions and the absurdity of trying to find a solution to certain never-ending contradictions is the essence of fracturing the structural politics. For example, in the ever-going debate, which is superior, philosophy versus literature, we cannot accept that philosophy being prioritized, nor can we accept the more simplified solution of prioritizing literature in the place of philosophy. When somebody says Ram is the hero of Ramayana, when somebody else down south writing Ravan Kavyam, when he says no, Ravan is the hero, it's not the way of suggesting simplified solution of prioritizing something over the other. There is a grave mistake of considering people who repudiate the claims made by canonical texts as something very erratic. Similarly, by structuring the contradiction between eternal versus temporal, transcendental versus experience oriented, and prioritizing the eternal and transcendental over the temporal and experience oriented, we find that something that belongs to a particular period and experience is being undermined in the whole process. And this is how the philosophical traditions of the West gained importance and prominence over all other subjects, all other disciplines of knowledge. These kinds of contradictions and easy solutions become the cause of disavowal of time. It's like in the partition program, how to live in amity. The solution is separating the nation and giving one part of the nation to the other, which is not at all a solution. The problem remains the same. So this kind of an easy solution is the cause of the disavowal of time. Time is not something that could be so easily simplified or reduced and seen. Irreducibility of time is something that we have to certainly bear in our minds. Trying to say something that is eternal, that is beyond our times, or trying to confine everything within a particular time frame, both these acts would take us to the blunder of not respecting time, not taking time in its own seriousness. Instead of coming to a simplified solution, it is better to retain aporia, that is, contradictions without solutions, would yield better results. Decisions all seem to be related to violence. This is my fifth important and the most important topical point in my lecture today. Decisions all seem to be related to violence. Any ready-made decision imposes a ready-made violence, a preconceived violence upon certain sections of people. For example, when there is an unrest between India and China over the border issue, when the United States tries to intervene with a ready-made solution, that ready-made solution, if accepted, certainly will lead to a certain kind of violence. Any ready-made decision is inherently available only with a ready-made violence upon a section of people. When two parties are contesting, one specific party is going to be affected with the ready-made solution, with the mono decision. When we say that the solutions are related to violence, it doesn't mean that there shouldn't be any solutions at all, or there are no probable solutions at all. The fact is that there are plenty of solutions if needed. Solutions that can be changed are also possible. There is no final solution at all. There are solutions. Each of us can take our own solutions, and we need not stick to that specific solution forever. We can change it. Fundamentalist approaches, very honestly, I'm telling you all, fundamentalist approaches snatch, grab such opportunities so ruthlessly from all of us. It's like in our own village panchayats, the cup panchayat verdicts, when two parties fight, between themselves, the village panchayat chief will come and he'll say, don't fight for a piece of land. For an acre of land, don't fight. You have 5 acres of land and the rest can be owned by the other. It's an easy way of ready-made solution which is offered to both the parties who are contesting for a land. But in reality, the land belongs to one specific group of people. If you are reminded of a recent similar verdict, I am not responsible for it. So Derrida, Deleuze, Foucault, Lyotard, Labarthe and Nancy, if at all these French postmodern intellectuals agree at one point, that is, we should worry about a society that considers time and differences sympathetically. Please, I'm trying to repeat the statement. We should worry about a society that considers time and differences sympathetically. Language does not have the potentiality or capability of acquiring the meanings in its entirety. Meaning keeps fluctuating or constantly changing. Society is the network where the games of languages are played. So, in all the efforts of integrating the politics, we should not forget the difference between the political organization and the remainders. This is the sixth important topical point. We should not, when we try to integrate politics in our civil life, we should not forget the difference between the political organization and the remainders. REMAINDERS. That is the difference between the society defined by you, the power, the notional center, and the society that stands beyond your definition. I hope you got the clear meaning between these two. A society which is defined, chartered, designed by the notional center as a typical ideal society, Indian society, which is synonymous with Hindu society, and the society that stands beyond your definition, beyond your borders, are the ones rejected by you, or the remainders, and the difference between these two is very, very important and relevant. It is but inevitable that these gaps, these remainders, these leftovers would choose the politics of their own choice. So the time when the politics of the remainder is acknowledged, it would become the postmodern time. That is the very big, very great success of postmodernism and poststructuralism. So during the 1950s, the world all over was having governments which were born out of long-term battles. Fascism was replaced with democracy. liberalized capitalist governments that prioritized social welfare, socialist states, proletariat dictatorship, post-colonial nationalist governments were the new governments formed all over the world. The proletariats carried a dream of seeing an egalitarian state. The third world countries which were released from the clutches of the colonial power, the British imperialism, also formed a new government with the slogan nation building and people's participation. You don't know all and sundry, the peasants, the lowest section of the Indian social stratification. Everybody invariably contributed to the whole nation building process, imagining, dreaming that the new government, which is just released from the rescued itself from the clutches of colonial power, will do something great and good for them. Even in the first world nations, people were so happy that they were identified along with the superpower first ranking nations, that they were part of it. They were part of the First Nations. They were part of the American dream. But very unfortunately, the ensuing 25 years totally disappointed their expectations and beliefs. Social governments slowly started transforming into mere law enforcing machines. Unemployment crisis, social inequalities multiplied like anything. In the Soviet Union and East European countries too, totalitarian governments emerged that denied people's fundamental rights and basic democratic rights. The governments that were formed after independence from colonial rule, like India, turned out to be a fiasco, a complete failure. These governments were imperialistic and were, in fact, more imperialistic than the real British imperialist forces, and were trying to exploit the people, the local people belonging to the last rung of the society, the ethnic people, the minorities. The minorities were denied basic and democratic rights, and these governments became responsible for severe abject poverty and unemployment problems, and ecological degradation as well. So the result of this was the rise of structuralism, post-structuralism, and Frankfurt School of Marxism, which vouched that there was a change in the thinking process also. Thinkers who originally questioned the modernism and Enlightenment traditions were once again reinvented. Philosophers like Nietzsche, Immanuel Kant, Wittgenstein were all reread with avid interest once again. In the political field, exactly in 1968, which I consider as the turning point, after French students' movements, anti-Vietnam War agitations, arousal of the rise of nationalist movements, ecological movements, civil rights movements by the American blacks, movements by the unemployed, all these political activities can be seen as onset elements of the postmodern turn. These inform the world that political changes are possible with regular political identifications, or political identifications are possible without these identities. This also showed the crisis faced by identity politics. These kinds of crises were echoed in all isms, including Marxism, right from the beginning itself. The closed class identification was not possible at all. External sources which are beyond the class identity marker, could prove to be disastrous, as this fact was realized by thinkers like Gramsci and Sorel. They expressed their concern over this. The growth of capitalism did not happen the way the Marxists had imagined. Anyway, the civil rights movements, which found their inception in the Western countries, the black movements, the unemployed people's movements, greenery movements, feminist movements, anti-heterosexual patriarchy movements, All these realized the modern political crisis and took the postmodern turn with the clarity of vision. So, in the place of modernist concepts like centralized, integrated, logical subjectivity, and unemotional, very rational, quest driven, multiple subjectivities, this specific thing was imbibed. Based on this, the politics of difference was endorsed. In their attempts to oppose patriarchy and its disciplinary modes, several feminist movements across the world and lesbian gay movements across the world took politics into a completely new and nuanced form of politics. For instance, to insist on the difference between a man and a woman, the feminist movement coined a new phrase, the difference feminism. Women like Linda Nicholson even questioned the approach of this difference feminism and said that there are differences even among women themselves, and this aspect have been completely neglected in difference feminism. Her argument was that the problems of different women are different, like the problems faced by black women and white women are totally different, and the problems between the heterosexual and homosexual were all different from one another. In the Indian context, when the whole lot of the exodus of Indian women's writing in English in the post 70s, 80s, and 90s, all these Indian women's writing in English projected the Indian women as a victim of the cruel practice called sati, S-A-T-I, the problem of widowhood, the problem of divorces, the problem of dowry harassment, all kinds of these problems which were typically problems of the elite women of India. The 3% women's problem of India has been universalized and converted into the whole Indian women's problem, which is a myth, because this kind of tonsuring a woman's head and cornering her or confining her to the corner of the house, compelling her to wear white saris, these cruel practices of sati and widowhood were not part of certain other cultures, the majoritarian indigenous cultures of the land. So the problem of Dalit women is different from the problem of an elite woman of India. The problem of a black woman is so very different from the white woman who is privileged. Though in the case of disability studies too, we face the same kind of problem. Even today, after a lot of mandatory requests and appeals that come from that flood in from the MHRD and other forums like UGC, you can have only a handful of colleges and institutions which still provide with the necessary equipment to enable the disabled students to perform on par with the so-called normal students. So it is irrational to expect the disabled students to perform the same way, the same manner, when you don't provide them with the necessary infrastructure. It is not the students who are disabled. It's not the persons who are disabled. Rather, the environment is disabled. You have to enable the environment to accommodate the so-called disabled or differently abled students and persons. So the way in which the system has recognized the identities, there is a serious problem in not accommodating, in not even recognizing the presence of the other, the different people with different abilities. A visually challenged student too faces the same kind of examination today, because the provision is provided to them, the infrastructure is provided. So once provided, once you enable your environment, your atmosphere, people will certainly perform, but certainly with a different mode. Why should if I write from left to right, why should I Why should I justify my own style of writing and look down upon the person who writes from the right side to the left side? Why should I look down upon a person like Chinese who write from top to bottom? Their their calligraphy, their writing style is different, their mode is different. You should respect the difference, and we should accept that any kind of performance, any kind of act that is done with a difference need not be looked down upon or need not be mocked at. So then, in that case, should we completely deprive ourselves of our identity? Will be the question that arises in your minds. So if I try to bulldoze all our identities, you may ask, should we completely deprive ourselves of our identity? Under what common agenda should we unite then? This is the question of the modern politics. In that case, will our union, will our unification not become weak before a firm and strong enemy? So when somebody is attacking us, we should consolidate ourselves only under a common identity. Say we are all Indians, we are all patriotic Indians, something like that. So negating identity and fundamentalism, will they not give rise to nothingness, nihilism? These questions arose even in the Western atmosphere. The ideas expressed by Stanley Aronovitz, who is a postmodern socialist, Kwame Anthony Appiah, a black thinker, Ernesto Laclau, a Marxist. All these people's concerns about these issues bear relevance in this context. How will losing your base take you to nothingness or nihilism? Asks Laclau. And he says, fundamentalism is where, for a particular problem, you choose solution in the external reality. Then, with the modern outlook, it forms a realistic solution to the particular problem. Laclau puts forth the idea, instead of a closed fundamentalism, a horizon that is open on all the four sides is advocated, releasing itself from the bond of single meaning and attaching itself into a long chain of meanings, which was called floating marker, a thought which was called horizon without fundamentals, a concept which Laclau celebrated, endorsed. Similarly, breaking the identity doesn't mean completely eradicating the identity. Like an African identity is a social fact and it is prone to certain political repercussions. We should not leave it at any cost. At the same time, we should not forget criticizing the essentialistic qualities on which closed identities are structured, says Anthony Appiah. We do not say that there shouldn't be identities like the proletariats, the working class, Tamils, Kannadigas, Malayalis, Bengalis. We are not against these identities. At the same time, we also do not deny the political importance of these identities. But a person who is a Tamil, who is a Bengali, has the chances of having other identities also. So the last important aspect, as Chantal Mouffe had said, by stressing on these independent identities like caste, creed, gender, race, language, it is not meant for pitching all of them separately or placing them against each other. Integration for a particular caste is not only possible, but it is also important and essential. But if we understand that integration is historical, is viable for changes, can be widened, can be shortened, can be stretched, then the changes of violence gets reduced. Yet another resourceful possibility of this postmodern political approach, the process of postmodern political approach lies in accepting the multifaceted quality of our enemy and their intentions as well. It's not just recognizing our own multifacetedness. It is also accepting the multifacetedness, the multi-dimension of our enemies and their intentions and their plans and their modes of attack, everything, their ideologies. So it is like the disability rights movements across the world crying for the acknowledgement of their own progress, the feminist movements, the sexual minorities like the gay, lesbians, and others, the transgenders who started writing their own, recording their own autobiographies now. So in a nation which considers Gandhi's My Experiments with the Truth as a canonical text, an autobiography which every Indian should possess, the same kind of importance, there is nothing wrong if the same kind of importance is being attributed upon an autobiography written by a transgender, an autobiography of a sex worker, Nalini Jamila, the autobiography of a minority women by the transgender by Revati, the autobiography, the semi-autobiographical work of the minority women in India by Salma. So these the autobiographical, fictional, semi-autobiographical narratives, testimonials of Dalit writers and tribal writers, all these micro narratives are as equal or equally important as the idea of nation, the idea of nation and nationhood is certainly relegating all other micro narratives. There are multiple identities for an Indian. An Indian cannot be an Indian all the time. It's as I already told you, with the rise of nation states, with the rise of post-colonial nation states, with the rise of Soviet nations states, and a lot of modern states with modern politics. The problem with all these modern states is the disillusionment that all these states cast, the disillusionment with which all these states, treated their subjects. So this kind of even Girish Karnad has written a wonderful play titled Chuklak, which was a very, very beautiful satire on the disillusionment of the Nehruvian era. Exactly the Nehruvian era and its subsequent disillusionment. So the whole Indian nation was looking forward to Nehru and his government because he was viewed as a savior, because that was the first time India got liberated from the erstwhile British imperialist forces. So the disillusionment which was caused by all these states, nation states, with its identity politics, there was a crisis, and that crisis needs to be acknowledged. And it is essential, we should understand that in our own way, the time has come that we have to think about alternative politics. Like Girish Karnad, who criticized the Nehruvian era by drawing a parallel from history, Muhammad bin Tughlaq, very fortunately, he was celebrated like anything with the publication of Tughlaq, critiquing the Nehruvian era. That point of time, he was celebrated, and he was not arrested for being an anti-Indian. And this kind of and Chinua Achebe, who pronounced and who fought throughout against the British imperialist forces, but accommodating and acknowledging the use of English language, quite opposed to Ngugi Thiongos's use of the native language. He justified, he defended his use of English language, saying that it is not imposed upon me. I'm trying to master English language, and thereby I'm trying to infiltrate into the ranks of the British imperial masters and trying to contest that center, that notional center. So this kind of mini centers, by bulldozing the notional center or the national center, we should acknowledge, it is high time that we should acknowledge alternative politics. We should think beyond the binaries. We should think beyond the structure. We should think over and above the structure, over and above the binaries set by the identity politics, the white versus black, the upper versus the lower. So this kind of a binary is not going to help us anymore. So it is not important whether we belong to the right wing or the left wing. In between, a lot of other wings are available. A wing is a wing. You can even go identityless. We shouldn't think that if we don't belong to, if we are afraid of aligning with the right, we have no other choice except to be with the left. Or if you are very much afraid of being the rightist politics, there is a lot of space in between. You need not occupy the top and the bottom. In between, there is a lot of space. I can even sit in a corner and be identityless. But that politics of difference, the even the seminal text like Ramayana can be given a lot of interpretations, and it has been given a lot of interpretations in the Indian context. There is a point of view of Ravan. There is a point of view of Shurpanakha. There is a point of view of Sita. A lot more versions are available for a common text. So a text is embedded with lots and lots of meanings, and it is the reader, it is the people with the political sensibility to recognize, to identify the difference in all our lives, and it is high time that we need to recognize and acknowledge the alternative politics, the alternative readings, alternative texts, alternative literatures, and by encouraging readings of alternative literatures, alternative texts, that we can really involve ourselves in the politics of difference, which is an egalitarian politics, rather than being in a closed categorization of the politics of identity. So thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity, and I would be happy if there are questions to respond to. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for your wonderful lecture. You rightly pointed out the pluralistic attitude that is found in postmodernism and the concept of multiple identities. Sir, there are a few questions from the participants. I would like to go one by one. There is one question. What about Charles Darwin's Origin of Species? The word changed the concept of God, which has resulted to dethrone the authority of church in politics. Sir, please shed some light on this aspect.
I didn't make a mention of Charles Darwin because I restricted myself to the discussion related to the politics of the crisis in the politics of identity and the emergence of the politics of difference. But then, as the participant raised it, yes, Charles Darwin's evolution theory has really shaken the foundation of the church, and God as a power center. Even it just it has shaken the foundations. But then, even after that, people continued to interpret things like social reality and man's relationship with this cosmos and all other things only in terms of God, the capital G. So the capital G could not be allayed, could not be shaken, could not be bulldozed, even in the post-Darwinian age, because there is a philosophical tendency to define God. If you ask who is God or what is God, people won't directly answer you even today. They will answer God only by negation. God is not tree. God is not a concrete. God is not flesh and blood. God is not God is without identity. So God is what you can feel. God is not what you can rationally see. So by alternate ways, by negating the identity of God, only people are trying to establish the identity of God. So I think only with the romantic revival, or only with the romantic age, the movement which openly proclaimed that there is no God, which demolished the concept, the God-centric universe, and converted it into a man-centric or nature-oriented universe. That was the first time God actually faced a serious setback.
Okay, sir. Thank you for enlightening on this aspect. There is another question. It seems very interesting. Your inference that society is not a laboratory, of course, is the fact, but from perspective of postmodernism, what is actually society is all about if it is not a laboratory?
No, it is. I mentioned it very clearly. When the relationship between the signifier and the signified is examined, is analyzed, there cannot be any external forces. Even if there is an external force that is very much inert, muted, it won't speak. So in a society, it is not possible, because society is not a scientific laboratory where everything can be kept in mute. When two people meet and discuss something about politics, you can't say that the third party intervention is restricted. Anybody can share, anybody can interfere in your own in your own idea making, in your own discourse making. So you can't make the whole society mute. That is only in that context I said society is not a scientific laboratory. You will get a lot of external determinants. You will get a lot of other sources that come and influence your way of thinking. That is where I said it is not a social, it is not a scientific laboratory.
Yes, sir. Thank you. There is one more question. When we are reading the text in one specific way, the differences in opinion come up, especially in the context of literary analysis. In the present time, can there be a possibility of the perspectives being received as original and personal and not as something against what is the obvious interpretation?
That only time can decide. Even now, people are very much reluctant to accept alternate views. When we question the way in which MK Gandhi was glorified in this nation, people immediately think that Al-Patmas like us cannot understand the greatness of Mahatma. So this way of making derogatory remarks against alternative ideas, alternative even the possibility, the presence of alternate ideas is not acknowledged properly, is rather laughed at in present times. So it is only the time should be ripen enough to accept the alternate modes of thinking and counter narratives.
Okay, sir. There is one more interesting question. Sir, can you suggest some measures which can enable environment and system accept the difference as usual?
This is an interesting question. The system is actually recognizing the differences. We don't really, we people who are very much tailored by the elitist discourses, we fail to recognize the inherent acknowledgement of or recognition of differences in a tribal setup in the indigenous systems. Even today, if you visit a village, a rural landscape, people always respect differences. Nobody ever, tries to impose their own idea as the notional center, hegemony. and nobody expects anybody else to follow them or follow certain norms and tenets so strictly. Even in the case of widowhood, which I was referring to, no widow suffers in a rustic landscape, like the way a widow is confined in an urban landscape. And no divorcee faces a kind of stigmatization in rural landscapes as one faces in the urban spaces. Only in the cities, divorcees, hide their single status, and they are very much discriminated. They are very much stigmatized in their workplaces. But in rural areas, be it a widow or a divorcee or any deprived women, they all live the usual way of life with everybody's support and cooperation. So there is an inherent supportive system in the indigenous communities and societies, which were very much polluted and which were very much dismantled or disrupted by the elitist discourses.
Yes, sir. We'll take up the last two questions, sir. That one should not, that one should aim not to take sides but remain neutral itself is a political move in itself. What is your stand on it, sir?
No, I strongly oppose this specific thing because neutrality is worse than taking sides. Neutrality is actually taking a side only. When you are, when an eagle is catching a chick, if you remain a mute spectator and remain neutral, then you are actually siding with the eagle. You are actually siding with the vulture. So the predator and the victim, you are supposed to take a side with the victim, the voiceless. When you remain neutral, you are certainly siding with the victor. You are certainly siding with the voiced and not the voiceless. So you are doing injustice to the voiceless by siding with the voiced, but in the name of being neutral. Neutrality is a myth. Objectivity is a myth. You can have multiple subjectivities.
Yes. True, sir. The last question for discussion. Sir, will it be possible to associate the concepts of signifier and signified with postmodernism? Kindly elucidate it.
No, the very base of postmodernism is linguistics. When it comes to literature, the language. So language has two important problems. One is the unknowability, that we don't know what reality is, because reality is relative. Even when we assume, sometimes when we assume that reality is we are familiar with reality, we know what reality is, we suffer from the second important problem, that inexpressibility of what we know as reality. So the first thing is, we don't know what real is, because there is no reality at all. Reality is relative. And secondly, we don't know how to explain what a reality is in terms of language. So when a baby is imitating whatever we speak in our homes, when it asks, Papa wants idlis, Papa wants biscuits, you may wonder who is that Papa. It is referring to itself, as it won't use the term I. It will never ask, I want biscuits. It will say, Papa wants biscuit, the third person only. So the actual problem of postmodernism is that it has opened a lot more vistas, for the readers and for people to understand that there are many ways in which certain thing can be interpreted. There is no singular, there is no singular history as we believe in new historicism. There is no singular, authentic, official history. There are histories. So many versions are available, and it is your discretion that you can try to accept or reject certain versions. But at no point of time one can claim that my version of history is real.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. Uh, There is one question again, but this participants, please note that this is the last question. Since we are running short of time, we need to head up for the presentation session at 2:30. So this will be the last question. Sir, Nehru's reference to Tughlaq, your take on it?
I have already clearly explained that it is a critique, it is a satire on the disillusionment of the Nehruvian era, like the shifting of the India's capital from Kolkata to Delhi, and the introduction of currency, Indian currency, and all such things. Beyond all such ideal advancements in the quarter century after the India's independence, the peasants, in the lives of peasants, in the lives of agricultural tenants, in the life of landless labor, in the lives of the people who badly wanted independence, or people who celebrated India's freedom from British imperialism. Nothing so positive happened in the lives of such people. So, utter disappointment, utter disillusionment rocked the lives of poor Indians. And Girish Karnad, as a very sensitive, very conscious, part of the society, being a writer, he has written a parody of the Nehruvian era, titling it as Tughlaq. So this Tughlaq is really a very interesting text which parodies the rule of Nehru.
So thank you so much, dear participants. We are at the end of this wonderful session. Sir, you stirred our minds with your great investigation into the field of postmodernism and its relation to the present politics. So thank you very much for this session. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Kannan.
You want to speak, sir?
Thank you.
Kannan sir wants.
Yeah, please.
Marks, it was fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Excellent.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Yes. So, dear participants, the first session of today's webinar is over. Now there will be a break of 15 minutes, after which there will be parallel paper presentation sessions. As we did yesterday, we are going to have 3 parallel sessions at the same time from 2:30 to 3:10, and the list of paper presenters will be told to you right now. So, dear participants, kindly pay attention here. So, the first paper presentation for session for today will begin exactly at 2:30. It will be moderated on Zoom app by our research scholar, Ms. Gayatri, and the following people will present on Zoom. I'll read out the names: Resmi TR, Maria Thomas, Rohini R, Rupavati Koregol, Roshni Vernekar, Shweta Kannan. So these people will be participating in the paper presentation on Zoom. Similarly, there will be 2 more parallel sessions on WhatsApp. Moderators Deepak sir and myself will call the participants for their presentation. First session on WhatsApp will be moderated by Deepak sir, Shabaz Khanum, Shilpa Gadag, SK Saiful Rahman, Sneha Halladmani, Sumangala Pattar, Sunena Kalagudi, Sunita Gumshetti. These people will be presenting their paper through WhatsApp call to Mr. Deepak Shinde sir. And then I will be calling the following people for their presentation: Suresh Gangotri, Tanvi Joshi, Vani S, Vidya Ilal, Dr. Mantha Padma Bandhavi, Sane Shivashankar, and Dr. Shilpa Sapre. We will start this paper presentation at 2:30. Kindly stay tuned.